So I'm going to try and speak slower for you guys this week. We're going to be in the book of Judges today. And if I speak too fast, please just let me know somehow. I don't want to make it harder for you guys. I know it's difficult to listen to English. Is Judges an easy book to pronounce in Russian?
Yes.
Yeah. Solye. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, Solye, the judge. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, so at least that's easier for you with the messages and the note taking rather than whatever it was, Kniga Isus from yeah from. So anyway, the book of Judges, Soli, is another spiritually hard to understand book. It's a book that I look at and I initially think, well, what on earth is there for us to learn spiritually, applicationally, and practically from this book? And I thought about it long and hard. I've studied as much as I could throughout the last week. And what I've taken from it is that studying this book teaches us lessons on leadership. And in one sense, it's going to teach us bad examples of leadership. And on the other hand, it's going to teach us good and positive and faithful examples of leadership. Now, no one in this room is directly a leader, not a church leader. Some of you may lead projects, you may do things. I'm not a church leader, I just lead projects. And even that I don't do very often. I'm a missionary. I'm not here to be a leader. I'm here to build leaders and raise leaders. So you might think, well, if this is lessons on leadership, how is this lesson relevant to me? And how is it relevant to anyone really that's not a leader? Well, everyone needs to know this because, at least for the men in this room, you may very well be spiritual leaders of a church one day. You may be elders and deacons one day. And even if you're not in a position to become an elder or a deacon one day, you may well lead projects one day. You may be in charge of certain projects that need leadership. So it's important to learn for that sense. But even so, the most important thing is that we learn from the book of Judges what kind of leaders we need to follow. Are we in churches where the leadership are doing a good job, a biblical, faithful job of teaching and leading? When we're in part of a project, are we following men and women that are leading the way they should be? Did someone come in? No. When it comes down to it, are we following the right kind of people? Are we following people that are Christocentric and want to show us the way towards Christ as well? So when it comes down to authorship of the book of Judges, ultimately no one knows, and it's kind of pointless to speculate. But if you read the commentaries, there are several different ideas. Emma and Abigail are playing outside, so if you hear anything there, just don't worry about it. Personally, I'm inclined to say that it's a bit of a compilation of different stories that were collected over a period of time and smashed together into this book. And I think that they were slightly edited so that they could appear to be one unified narrative. There's definitely some signs that the book itself is fragmented from several different books. It could have been commissioned by King David to give Israel their history and to let people know how they got to the point where we had kings. That's possible. Samuel himself, the final judge of Israel, he could have been the one that compiled things and wrote everything out for us. We just don't know. What we do know is that at least part of it was written during the monarchy, so well after the period of Judges had ended. If we see chapter 17, verse 6, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." So clearly there's anticipation that there will be a king historically, meaning that this was probably written in a time where the monarchy had been set up already, or post-monarchy during the exile or after, which I think would be less likely. So the context of our passage is to show the history of Israel, essentially. How did Israel fare after they had conquered the land of Canaan, after they had gone in, after the death of Joshua? Sorry guys, it's a bit cold. You can get up and turn it off if you want. It's up to you. And ultimately, I think what the Israelites wanted to learn from this, what if King David commissioned it, Samuel wrote it, whoever had it written down, wanted to teach the Israelites to learn from their mistakes. And by extension, we can also learn from the mistakes that were made in this period. As for difficulties, there are quite a few in the book of Judges. The first one of two that I'm going to mention is Samson. Samson is a very difficult guy to understand in the scriptures. He seems to be a very strong leader, and then he goes and does stupid things, and then he shows strong leadership again, and then he does stupid things again. But the problem isn't so much with the narrative itself. The problem is that secular historians have started looking at the book of Judges, and they start reading the story of Samson, and they start saying, well, Israel hated the Philistines, and so they wanted to conquest against the Philistines, and Samson was their leader during this. So when they've recorded their history, they've attributed supernatural powers to Samson as a way of bigging up their own nation and pushing the Philistines aside because they're so weak they can't even deal with a guy who can kill people with a donkey's jaw, right? Obviously, that's secular history. If we take the text at face value, as we should historically, this doesn't become a problem. It's only when people start not taking it at historical value that it becomes a problem. So we just have to remember that. And remember, whenever someone has a dispute with history in the Bible, remember that they scrutinize the scriptures way more than they scrutinize any other historical document. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind when people come up with these silly little arguments. The other difficulty that I would mention is that of Jephthah, which I think is around chapter 11 or 12 of Judges. That's a horrifying story and a wonderful story all in its own way. But basically, Jephthah has a great victory, and he says to the Lord, I'll dedicate whatever comes through that door next to you. And who comes through but his daughter. And this becomes this horrible disaster where he then has to dedicate his daughter to the Lord. And that's not like what we say today, where we dedicate ourselves to service in the kingdom. His dedication meant burning her and killing her as a quote-unquote gift to the Lord. And so Bible interpreters really struggle with that. Like, what do we do with this story? Did God really expect him to do this? Did he actually do it? Because the text doesn't actually say he did it. Well, we can speculate about all those things. All we know is that the text indicates that he did do it. It doesn't say it directly, but they probably would have wanted us to know if he didn't do it. So I think they're just sparing us from the grisly details by not telling us that it happened, the authors. And I think the way we have to deal with this is just accept that when we go before the Lord and we say, I'm going to make a vow to you, that's a very serious thing. And I think that's what that story is trying to teach us. And I think that the Lord allowed all of this to happen to teach the Israelites that, and the church by extension. If we go and do stupid things and make stupid vows before the Lord, he may very well call us to take account for what we did. And that's what happened to Jethro. And so that doesn't resolve the difficulties of the passage, but I don't think we really can resolve them. We just have to accept that that's what happened and move on. So having said all of that, what's the purpose of the book of Judges? The purpose is to teach us about leadership, as I said. And I've heard it said a few times that Judges is representative of spiritual warfare. That's, I hate to say it in such a horrible way, but that's complete baloney as far as I'm concerned. It's so silly to say that. Emma and I used to attend a church in this city in the evenings. And I won't say who it was, but they're not bad people at all. They're faithful. But they had a guy who was preaching every Sunday. And when we started visiting them, he was preaching through the book of Jude. And he was talking about spiritual warfare. And I was like, okay, he's talking about the same thing every Sunday, but it's relevant to the book of Jude, so that's fine. Well, he finished the book of Jude, and then he immediately started preaching from Judges. And he said, this book is also about spiritual warfare. And I was like, no. We think we lasted 1 or 2 Sundays and we stopped going in the end because we were just hearing the same thing every Sunday. And it wasn't even related to the book of Judges. This isn't a manual on spiritual warfare. It's not anything to do with spiritual warfare. It's purely a discussion, a historical document that shows what God did through the Judges, so leading up to the monarchy being established, which starts in 1 Samuel. So it's history. It's divinely written, it's divinely inspired history, but that is what it is. It's history. So overall, from my point of view, when I read it as a purely human being, I see very little success in the book of Judges. Leadership just seems to be disaster after disaster. It seems to be something that begins awful and just keeps getting worse and worse and worse as the years go by. But when we look at it closely, we actually learn some different things. But just to get us to the point where we start seeing the beginning of the Judges, open to chapter 2, we see that Joshua dies, and starting from verse 6, or rather in verse 6, Joshua, that's the beginning of his death. When Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years, and they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, try saying that with a mouthful of mushrooms, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So basically, the people are beginning to get chaotic there. Like, they've got no leadership, Joshua's gone, what's going to happen next? And immediately we learn, starting from verse 11, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hands of surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. You just see the contrast there between the massive success of Joshua and the absolute catastrophic failure of what happens after he dies. And that's just one thing. It's not in my notes. It's just something that came to mind as I've been speaking here. That is often what happens when we base all of our churches and our ideas off of a leader rather than the word of God. And seeking men who are faithful to the word of God is an important thing. But when we look at them and say, right, that's the man, that's the guy, like we can respect all those wonderful teachers in America or the United Kingdom. We can respect our pastors. We can respect our teachers. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is when we build our entire identity around those guys, then we're bound to do the same thing that the book of Judges does, where the people, they've lost their leader. Now what do? A historical example of that is Charles Spurgeon. He had all these people following him. I think, if I'm not wrong, 10,000 people were officially members of his church. What happened when he died? It dispersed. Because they weren't going there. I hope it's not too bold of me to say this on their behalf, but they weren't going there because they wanted to be part of the church per se. They were going there because there was this famous guy and they wanted to be under his ministry. And we've seen that happen in various other contexts as well. And so that's just a little warning for us not to build our identity as churches around leaders themselves, but to be part of the whole organic unity of the church, learning constantly from the word, learning from the leaders as well, but not basing everything on what the leaders are. And so that leads us to the rising up of the judges, which begins in verse 16 here. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he said, because this my people have transgressed my covenant, that I commanded their fathers, and have not obeyed my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did or not. So the Lord left those nations, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. So it's just horrible, isn't it? They just have completely lost everything at this point, and then Lord still shows them pity, and they do well for a while, but then because they keep basing themselves on their leaders, they keep falling back down into the pit when the leader dies, and then another leader comes, and then it's just a circle repeating itself over and over again. So what I think we should focus on just for a second here is that there was evidently success in this passage. It says that when the Lord raised up a good judge for them, then the people were obedient. So we should take note of that and not just cast it away and say, oh, look at this evil people. They never did anything good. When there was a judge, they were doing good. So it's just important to highlight that. And on top of that, the Bible even tells us that some of their judges were faithful men. If you turn to the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, it gives us a very interesting insight. So we all know that the 11th chapter of Hebrews is a chapter about faith, faithful men who have lived before us. And in verse 32, we read, among those faithful, and what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. So very clearly, we've got 4 names there that are all men that were involved in judging Israel. Not necessarily all judges themselves, but they were judging Israel in some form, some form of leadership. And Hebrews here is saying that they were faithful, okay? Which shocks us, right? Samson? Jephthah? Faithful men to be recorded in Hebrews 11? These are not men that we would assume should end up in that list of faithful names. Gideon, he didn't have enough trust in God. God gave him a direct revelation and he said, let me test this by putting out a fleece. And if it's dry, then it'll be fine. God did that. And then he said, oh, this isn't enough, actually. Let me do it again, but reverse. If it's next time wet, then he didn't trust God the first time. He didn't trust God the second time. It was only after 3 times that he trusted God. And that just, again, as a little aside for you. Has anyone read that book, The Cross and the Switchblade? Have you read that, Daniel? David Wilkerson?
I know of it.
Yeah. I didn't read it. I read the first couple of chapters and then put it away because it's just too charismatic for me. But,
what is it called again?
Cross and the Switchblade. He mentions that he did what he says is a Gideon, I don't remember how he worded it, but he did a Gideon miracle, providence, whatever he says, where he believed his television was bad for him. So he said, I'm going to put an advert in the local newspaper and if someone responds to it within an hour or something like that, then I'm going to sell the TV set. And I know that God has told me to do that. Well, someone calls him up in half an hour after he places the ad and then he sells the TV because that's God's will, right? The problem with acting like that is God is not commending what Gideon did. Gideon is acting in complete faithlessness. He has been told very clearly what to do. He doesn't need any signs. And yet he still asks for a sign. And then when he gets that sign, it's not enough for him. So he asks for another sign. Okay. So God is showing him a lot of grace there, but ultimately that's terrible leadership. He has got direct orders from the boss and he's still saying it's not good enough. Barak, I think, is probably fair enough as a leader. I don't see very much that could be said against him. Samson, well, we all know Samson, that goes without saying. Silly little Samson with his little Delilah. All those times that she tricked him and he still fell for it in the end. And then Jephthah, of course, with his daughter. We just look at these guys and we think, how can we call these men faithful? Yet the Bible does. The Bible does call these men faithful. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that faithful leaders sometimes fail to be faithful. Okay? Faithful leaders sometimes fail to be faithful. That does not take away from their overall faithfulness when they make mistakes, when they act in unfaith. We've seen recent examples without any names. There was a gentleman who, he was a big conference speaker, had his own organization, and he had been found to make fake social media accounts where he was soiling the names of other speakers, even those that were coming to speak at his conference. He was accused of this, he confessed, he repented, and that's not a reason to say that he was not faithful just because he made this one mistake. Likewise, again, another recent example, we've had a gentleman, someone I know personally even, not very well, but I knew him, who had a very faithful ministry all of his life, and then he cheated on his wife. Now, everyone looks at that guy and says, oh, look, he's ruined his entire ministry. And yeah, maybe there's some truth to that. But the reality is that he's confessed his sin. He's repented of his sin. I quoted him in a book that I wrote recently, and I sent it to someone, and he came back saying, probably wise not to quote him right now. And I'm like, why? He's faithful. He was faithful when he wrote it. He's still faithful. He's just made a mistake in his overall life, and maybe that disqualifies him from ministry in the future. Fine, fair enough. But he's repented of his sin. Are we really going to take away all of the good work that God did through these men just because they made these mistakes? And I don't think that that's the case. That should be the case. But of course, we should also say that realizing that there are true phonies out there. And this one, I don't mind saying the name because it rings very true to us, Rabbi Zachariah. That man was a scoundrel. He was using his business to, I don't want to say rape. That wasn't really what was going on, but he was manipulating women for sexual favors through his ministry, through his business, and that carried on until the day he died, as far as we know. And there are people out there that are just complete scoundrels, but those that repent, those that admit their mistakes, they ask for forgiveness, we need to accept that that's a good thing and not just criticize them all the time. So the judges are among those these judges that Hebrews mentioned, they are among those who royally messed up, like big time messed up. They did so many stupid, bad mistakes, but overall, the scripture tells us that they remained faithful. So let that be a lesson to us. Leaders make mistakes, so don't be harsh or critical towards them unjustly. How often is it that a faithful leader is loved by everyone, and then he makes one little mistake, and suddenly it's, oh, this guy's terrible. I don't want anything to do with him anymore. We're going to burn his books. We're going to never listen to his sermons ever again. We're going to delete everything off of the internet, his blogs, his YouTube sermons, everything. How often does that happen? It seems to be a yearly occurrence these days that another preacher has done something that someone didn't like, and that's it. He's out now. He's off the circuit of preaching in the big conferences. And it'll all just seem so silly to me. And, I'll put my hand on my heart here and say that's why I get so annoyed with Reformed podcasts and blog posts. They feed on this sort of thing. They thrive when a leader falls and has a failure of faith. Because that's what people want to listen to. They want to read stories about these things, and they want to listen to these things because it fuels their pride. Like, oh, I would never do that. The aforementioned guy that cheated on his wife. I saw so many Facebook posts from Christian leaders criticizing him, saying, oh, I would never look my wife in the eye if I was doing that to her. I don't want to say the name on here because it was someone that I knew, so it kind of strikes me a bit. But again, like these people that were talking about him, they didn't even meet him once in their life. And I knew him. I spent some time with him at one point. So it hit me a bit more. And yeah, they were just saying, oh yeah, I would never look my wife in the eye after cheating on her like he did for 5 years and la, 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 la. They use these mistakes that people make, their sins, and they use it to make themselves look good. And deep down, that's what attracts us as well as listeners, as people that consume this. We want to hear that because we're so critically natured ourselves. We want to read those stories about the failures, the moral failures, because we're sinful as well. And we just take pleasure in that, seeing that someone who was great fell to our shame as well. So take this to heart. Be slow to criticize leaders, especially your own leaders, and be especially so slow to criticize leaders when they're not your leaders as well. Again, that's the whole thing with Facebook and podcasts. You've got people left, right, and center. They've got a theological degree, and that gives them a quote unquote the right to criticize these guys for the decisions they make. But they're not in those contexts, and they don't know that they wouldn't make the same decisions if they were in that context. There's always these things that we just don't understand, and the internet is crazy these days. You can't swim through all of this and come to the right conclusion because you're not there. And it's not your right to either. It's not our right to go around saying, oh, well, this guy made that mistake. And focus on your own context. Be slow to bring criticism when it's out of your context. And if you are ever a leader, don't be discouraged by your mistakes. We all make mistakes. I made a mistake just this last Sunday when leading our guys in the village. I let them out of the car so I could go around the village picking people up, and I left them with the tent to build. I said, you guys build the tent while I go and get everyone. And then I get a call from Raresh here saying, well, where are the instructions to the tent? I don't know, it's in the box, right? See, I didn't check, I didn't make sure. And I still don't know where they are, just for the record, so we're going to blame. And the result of that was that the tent came crashing down around us while I was preaching. So that was fun. So, it doesn't have to be a big spiritual moral failure to be a mistake, but some people, these guys are gracious, so they they showed me a lot of grace for that mistake. I definitely didn't deserve it because there was a lot of shade that was lost for them to hold the posts up. But you can make these kind of mistakes. You can make spiritual mistakes. That doesn't automatically throw you out, and you can recover from those mistakes if you were ever in that position. So instead, learn from your mistakes and encourage your leaders to do the same. And that's the first lesson of leadership in the Judges. Follow the guys who learn from their mistakes. Follow the guys that say, I messed up, I made a mistake, I sinned. Lord, forgive me. Those who are involved, forgive me. The Church Universal, forgive me. Let's move on. I've learned from my mistake. Let's move on. Those are the kind of men that we want to follow, because there is not a single leader in this world who is perfect, without mistakes, without flaws, without problems, without sins. And if we throw someone out just because they made a mistake, we'll never have anyone. We'll never have a leader. So follow the guys that learn from their mistakes, because those are the guys that have gone through the battle, they've gone through the trenches, and they've learned how to deal with their own sinfulness. And following those people teaches us how to deal with our own sinfulness. And even then, sometimes it takes a leader time to realize their mistakes. There's no timeline where I can say, right, you didn't realize your mistake for a week, so we're kicking you off the leadership team now. It's been a year, you haven't realized. That's something that each situation individually has to deal with, but be patient as well with leaders. It does take time for people to realize their mistakes. Those of you that are married in this room, you know that for sure, right? It takes time to accept our mistakes and come to our spouse and say, forgive me. I'm not starting anything here. I see how you're looking at him. I don't want any part of this. I'm like you. I'm like you, Ilya. It takes me forever to apologize to my wife for what I do wrong. Or he's looking away. He doesn't want to look at her. You should have seen the look she was giving him. It was lasers. It was. Anyway, so patience, of course, patience with our leaders, patience with our spouses. So the idea after that is to focus on what our leaders are doing well. Okay. The reason the New Testament calls us to have a plurality of leaders in churches is in part so that leaders can work on each other's weak points and cover those weak points with their own strengths. I have a problem with the way Baptist churches often operate in this country. I guess it's the same in Ukraine, where you don't even have deacons and elders. You just kind of have a committee. Yeah, is that how it is in Ukraine? That's how Baptist churches are here. You just have a leadership, and then the pastor is kind of like the guy in charge. Yeah. Now, I've served with several pastors, and they're all like, I am the authority in this church. These guys, they might be leaders, but I have the final word. I literally worked with a guy once in another town who literally was like that. He said, I'm the pastor. You guys can discuss. You can make decisions. I have the final word. Likewise, I worked with another pastor who he literally said in front of me once, or to someone else he was speaking, but he said, these guys want to make these decisions, but if I stand up and say what I want to say, no one would dare stand against my authority. I'm like, that's not leadership. That's very bad leadership. So that's why we need a plurality of leaders. In a time of judges, it doesn't fit the same way. I'm just trying to apply this directly to our churches, because the judges were political leaders and spiritual leaders, but they weren't church leaders. They were leaders of the nation of Israel before there was a monarchy. So there is a difference there with the church. I'm just highlighting that just so we can keep going, because I don't want people to go from judges and say, oh, well, we should have one guy in charge of every church. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. And it's also worth noting that there are some contexts where it's just not possible to have a plurality of elders. I know a guy serving in Western Europe. He's a very faithful young guy. I suppose he's not too young, but he's a guy that I love very dearly. He's very gentle, great preacher, great doctrine, wonderful guy. He's planted a church in Western Europe, and he doesn't have people he can count on to raise up into leadership. So he's on his own. Now, he does have external help from organizations and a wider church denomination, but as far as the work on the ground goes, he's on his own. That's not unbiblical. He's just trying to build up to that point. He's working on that. So that's just to say that, again, patience, we don't always know every single situation. You guys listening to that might say, well, he needs a plurality of elders, and until he has a plurality of elders, it's unbiblical. Sure, that's what we would say on the surface, but then if you knew the situation like I do, you wouldn't make the same conclusion. So in such times, it is easy to get nitpicky with leaders, and I just want to say I have that tendency as well. I am exactly the kind of guy that will listen to one sermon and I'll be like, yeah, for 99% of it, but he'll say that one little thing about that Greek word that I don't like in that context, and I'll be like, oh, that's what I remember, right? I remember the bad thing that I didn't like. That's the same thing with all of us. We're all prideful. Our flesh is trying to dominate over us and tell us what's right and wrong. We need to ignore that. We need to push it away and replace it with the fruits of the Spirit. And especially when it comes to looking at our leaderships, let us learn to appreciate what is good about our leaderships rather than being nitpicky with those little things that we don't like. And yeah, let us take a leaf out of Hebrews book as we do that. Focus on the positives. Like, he's listed 4 guys there, 3 of which, just in my view, I just wouldn't put them there in the list of faithful men, but there they are. Take a leaf from that book. So overall, what do we do with all of this? Well, what do we see when we see their faithfulness? We see Gideon leading just 300 men in Judges 7 against the Midian camp. He had 22,000 men, and he reduced that number to 300 because it was too many men. That's faithfulness. God told him to do that. That's faithfulness. You imagine having a whole camp out there in the mountains, and you're looking down at them, and they're just this mighty power. And God says, "No, you've got too many men." You're looking at your 22,000. You think, "Oh, we can maybe do this." And God says, "No, that's not going to happen. There's too many men there. Take them down to the river. Choose some of them." And then and then they come back, and he still says, "No, there's still too many." And you're like, "What? Really? We've cut our army in half here." And then you're left with 300 men, and you still go and attack that camp. That's faithfulness. Faithfulness to what God called them to do, no matter what. We see Jephthah. He fights against Israel's oppressors in Judges 11. Now, he made a stupid mistake around that time, but he still fought them faithfully as the Lord directed. We see Samson taking out the Philistines in chapter 15. He did that faithfully. At the end of his life, he destroyed a large stronghold of the Philistines and gave his life to do that. Did he make mistakes? Absolutely. The guy was an idiot, right? Letting Delilah trick him like that. But he was faithful. Again, that's just another little thing. Someone can be a faithful leader and not necessarily be the most intelligent person in the room. That's just another little point to take there. So these are positive things that the Lord did through these fallible, fallen men. But what do we think of when their names come up? Samson, we think, that stupid guy sleeping with Delilah till she shaved his head. We think Jephthah, what an idiot, he gave away his only daughter to such a silly vow. We think of Gideon, oh, how unfaithful this guy is, asking God for all these signs. We have too much prideful tendency to focus on people's mistakes, and we forget the good that they are bringing to the table. We do that far too often. I do that far too often. And yet Judges really wants to show us their successes. So let's follow this model. Focus on what your leaders get right. When they preach sermons, don't look for those little tiny things that are just so silly, or even just a whole sermon that you didn't like. Their whole ministry isn't based on one sermon. Forget about the bad sermon. Think about how many good sermons they've preached that you benefited from. When they make decisions that you don't like, think about all the other times where they've made decisions that you really thought were the right decisions. When they don't do so well counseling people or doing pastoral care, think about all the times that they've been successful and they've really helped people, you yourself maybe, to come away from a sinful pattern or to learn something about yourself which you needed to learn. And they did that successfully. When you see their lifestyle and you think, oh, wow, he's living a nice, rich lifestyle, or he's doing this, he's doing that. Remember, it's none of your business. I'm like this as well. Like, I see pastors building houses left, right, and center in Romania, and I'm so tempted to be like, why? Where are you getting that money from? None of my business. It's none of my business. All that is jealousy inside me because I want to have a house for my family, and if I start criticizing other leaders for having that, that's all it is. Sometimes it's a legitimate question. I'll just accept that. Sometimes it is a legitimate question to ask where a pastor's getting the money to do these things. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. It's a case-by-case thing. Likewise, when we see them with their family, like, Oh, I would never do that with my family. I would never let my kids do that. I'd never let my wife speak to me like that, etc., etc. Where are their successes in family? Are they leading their family well? They make mistakes. Sometimes they don't discipline their kids the way they should do. We all make those mistakes. Is their family on a good general trajectory? And if it is, focus on that, not on the places where they're making mistakes. Now, despite all of that positive information, the book of Judges ends in a tragic way. Probably the most tragic ending to a book of the Bible. I can't think of any off the top of my head that end worse than this. And you get to Judges 19, which I'll just paraphrase. It's a horrific story where a Levite has a concubine. Sometimes she's mentioned as his wife. We don't really know why. But basically, he stops off in a town in the tribe of Benjamin, and people rape her. Essentially, they abuse her all night, and he kind of just lets it happen. And it's a horrible story, a horrific story that just chills me to the bone when I read it. But this leads to an outrage from the rest of Israel, and they turn on the tribe of Benjamin in chapter 20, essentially. And then the book ends on the awful note, the very last verse, chapter 21, verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes, which we also saw in chapter 17. That's why it's important to have solid leaders and to not base our leadership solely on ourselves or as followers on that person, on that man, on that woman. We need those solid leaders, otherwise we'll become in our churches just like Judges ends here. Each will do what he wants. Each will do as he sees fit, what's right in his own eyes. We will turn on our brothers and sisters. We will run around and say, well, I'm going to do this in the church, or I'm going to do this in the church, and it doesn't matter what anyone says, I'm going to do what I want to do. And this is why we should encourage biblical leaders and not break them down, because we need biblical leaders. We need those men to stand up and be counted. And if we're just criticizing them all the time over small petty things, is it any surprise that they don't want to stand up? So let it be a lesson to us all. We should encourage people. We should encourage leaders, not break them down. Focus on what is beneficial from their ministry. So that's the conclusion, isn't it? Find those Christ-exalting men who lead biblically and sit under their ministries. Learn and follow and be biblical. Amen.